Hello, everyone. Today we are joined by Julie Hertzberg. Julie is a managing director at Alvarez Marsal's North American restructuring practice based out of Detroit. Julie has more than 19 years of experience in restructuring and sits on the executive committee for the practice. Julie established A&M's case management services group 15 years ago, building the A&M team from zero to 50 plus people today. Julie is also the first female president of Insol International, a 10,000 plus person insolvency and restructuring member organization in more than 90 countries across the globe. Julie graduated with a bachelor's degree in Spanish with a minor in foreign affairs from the University of Virginia. And after that, Julie went on to get her JD from the University of New Mexico School of Law. Julie, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure having you here. Julie, you have a very interesting background, and in many ways, you've chosen a career that is not a very typical career. Tell us a little bit about what inspired you to get into restructuring and what guided your journey towards where you are today.
I appreciate you asking that question because people do look at me a little strange when they see my background on paper. And then they say, well, wait a second, how did you end up in restructuring? And the secret to that is it was an unusual situation. I was intending to go to law school to ultimately become an immigration lawyer. And I in college worked on human rights issues, particularly with a slant toward international human rights. And that was really the genesis of going to law school originally. And then my final year of law school, I took a bankruptcy class. And I had this young, inspiring female instructor who made even the US bankruptcy code interesting and fun. And I felt compelled, really, this is honestly a true story. I felt compelled, in part based upon her excitement about the law and the impact that you could have within a restructuring setting to make a difference in companies and save jobs. And all of those things resonated a lot with me because of my interest in human rights. And as I learned more about the practice, I ended up becoming a lawyer practicing in Chapter 11 debtor work in the US, found it fascinating, and then had an opportunity several years after that to join A&M along with the individual who came in to take over the North America restructuring practice approximately 15 years ago. And when he was looking at his opportunities at A&M, he said, I really need somebody to guide a case management practice which specializes in financial and legal disclosures for companies. And that's really where I fit a little bit of a different mold than many of the individuals at A&M, but it's a great combination of skills to have in US restructuring because you talk the lawyer talk and you have a financial understanding of companies. And so I was able to bridge those concepts and really have a thriving career here at A&M.
Fantastic. You are, as we said, the first female president of Insol. What's that been like?
Well, pre-COVID, the buildup was a little bit different than assuming my presidency, which happened April 1st, 2019 in Singapore. And I remember getting up on the stage and making my opening speech, talking about all the things we were going to do together in person over my 2 year tenure. And of course, at the end of 2019, people started to understand that there was this new virus out there. And ultimately, it impacted the things that I intended to do originally when I became president. And it didn't stop me from the priorities that I've set, which is engagement and leadership across the entire organization, as well as improving the diversity profile of the membership base and the leadership base within the organization. But it did catch me on my heels for one moment. I was one of or our organization was one of the first organizations globally to have to make the really tough decision to cancel our in-person conference, which was originally to be held in mid-March of 2020 in Cape Town, South Africa. And we made the decision at the end of February. And there were all kinds of emails going around of all of these different major organizations across the entire spectrum, not just insolvency and restructuring, saying, what do we do? We have all these people coming from different countries. There's a lot of unknowns. And we balanced the safety of the staff at the organization and obviously our invited guests, and had to make that tough decision very early in this process. And that really set the path for the rest of my thinking on behalf of the organization of doing an internal restructuring, which is somewhat ironic considering the type of organization. But I think what it's really done is allowed me to know that I can have an impact in different ways than I originally intended to, um, but to be a strong advocate of the ongoing communication that's necessary globally, particularly in times of pandemic where we can't form relationships in person, and really help continue to spread that message that younger people need to be active in these organizations. Younger people can make a difference, and even now more ironically in some ways they have more of an ability to do that in these global organizations because of the fact that typically only very few individuals get to travel to some of these coveted events. And now we've had the opportunity to bring in more youth engagement because of the fact that we are forced to do things electronically over video. And so I would say that even though in the outset you might say, from my perspective of working 16 years to get to this position, look at it as a failure, but I'm not that kind of person. I always try my best to look at the positive side of everything. And I think some of the things that we've done over this time will really set the stage for the organization and the younger people to continue to be active and lead the organization going forward.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And look, in many ways, what you did is so similar to what happens in a lot of restructuring situations where it's a bad situation. There's no two ways around it. And you make the best out of it, you make the most of it. So that makes a lot of sense. So, diversity inclusion are some of the elements that are very close to your heart. I also know ESG is something that is very close to your heart. In fact, you were recently appointed as the ESG Practice Head for A&M. Can you share a little bit about that and about what inspired you to take that role and what you hope to do with it?
I'm so happy that you asked me that. And I think a lot of people will be sitting there going, wait a second, restructuring, environmental, social governance, how do those pieces fit together? And I would say to you, in my journey of exploring ESG and how the firm can grow this practice robustly, the most important thing to me is what it actually stands for and the contribution that it can make to the world generally. And ESG at its core, environmental, social, governance, responsibility, every single item that goes into helping a company or an investor make a decision to invest in a company related to very tangible milestones that are reached in environmental, social governance improvement or something that leaves the world a better place. No matter what it is, you're doing something good for the community. If you're improving a company's environmental footprint, for example, and on the social side, getting back to what you just said with respect to diversity and inclusion, this is really an opportunity for us to change the landscape of the profile of companies. And it's something that, we all talk about, and it's been a big topic in recent years, but really to have that ability to give tangible benchmarks on how to improve a company's diversity and inclusion footprint is the most rewarding part of this for me. I mentioned to you earlier that one of the things that attracted me to restructuring was the social side of making a difference. When you save a company, you're saving jobs, and that means a lot to me personally. And so it was that bridge and connection between what we've been able to accomplish in a restructuring environment when we save these companies and what more I can do with that, with the passion that I bring to this process and the way that my brain thinks about being creative, and also relating this back to Insol as well, in my personal mandate that I set for myself to broaden the diversity and inclusion footprint within the organization in a variety of different ways. It's not just about gender. It's about including people from all different cultures. It's including people of different color and race. And it's also including people from different backgrounds. And not everybody thinks that way. And so what I think about when I think about growing a practice group like this is what I'm going to leave as my legacy in the world. And it that part's really overwhelming to me in some ways, like the power of having that ability and the enthusiasm of doing good things. And that's really at the core what I'm about. And so what I bring to this process, having been a practice group leader at A&M for 15 years, is understanding how our organization works to better make recommendations of how to build collaboratively across the firm with respect to this new business, but also just my general passion of raising awareness of these issues and actually not just talking about it, but making a difference. Tangible benchmarks for companies, tangible benchmarks for investors of how to take somebody down this path properly, and really see the reward on the other end.
Very interesting. So in addition to all of those, you wear the most important hat. That is, you are the mother of a beautiful 13-year-old girl. How do you combine everything, being a mother, being a professional, and doing it in a way that you are true and honest to both sides?
It's a great question. And I am a very honest person and open about the fact that some days you're great at one thing and maybe not so great at another. And then the other days you're kind of good at both. And then the role flips, right? And I think that's the most important thing for me is communicating in a way where people understand you can never be perfect at every single thing you do on a given day, but you do your best. And that recognition and acceptance, it's really hard for women to accept the fact that we might not be the best at anything on a given day, and we feel a lot of guilt for that. And that was something I had to overcome really early on in my career. When I first started at A&M, 12 weeks after I started, I got pregnant and was starting a new practice group. And there were a lot of thoughts swirling through my head back then that I'm sure are the same things that go through the heads of young moms or young professionals when they go down this path of having a family, and they think about what do I compromise on? What am I supposed to do? What is my firm going to think? And I couldn't have received a more welcome acceptance and reception of the fact, to your point, that the number one priority in my life would be my growing family, and that's okay. And so having a firm that really stands behind you is something that is a key to the success of this. And I always tell young people now, it's even more important than that, not just on the family level, but when you're looking for a job, if you have a firm that shares your own core values and a firm that's willing to evolve those core values with you. So we're talking about this incident or this circumstance, this great event right now in my life at the time was having a child. But before that, the way that I thought about things fundamentally and the core values that I set for myself, that's what attracted me to A&M to begin with, was that there was a shared perception that you work really hard for your clients, you are honest, you have a lot of integrity, you're action oriented, but also you have fun doing what you do because we work long hours, we're all in the trenches together, and that's what I latched onto. But it was this evolution of, okay, now I'm at this new juncture in my life that's really going to change decisions I have to make. And to have a firm carry that forward in the way that A&M did with me, that just made me more loyal. And interestingly enough, I've raised my daughter's only known A&M, right? She's 13 years old, and and she knows everybody's voices. She recognizes on the phone, and I've brought her up in that same sort of principled philosophy about, how you manage work and your personal life, and I've made her a part of that process in a way that she really enjoys. Um, and I've also told her, as she's looked at this journey with me, and she says, "Mom, you run a practice group, and what's it like being a woman doing that?" Because she sees the environment I'm in. She knows as a general rule how restructuring tends to work or used to work. And I tell her it's all about making sure that you advocate for yourself. It's all about working really hard and being honest, but also my big thing that I always tell her is the answer is always no if you never ask. And so I've taught her to advocate for herself as well. And that's what I tell the young people in our practice group and the young people who are just starting out their careers is people can't read your mind. And a lot of times the fear that you have in thinking that something um, could be could work for you is
Mm,
self-inflicted fear, right? The
absolutely.
recipient of it maybe has an entirely different perspective. I know that happens in our restructuring practice in the US. We work really long hours. Before COVID, we traveled sometimes 5 days a week on a regular basis. And a lot of people at the end of that juncture would need a break, but they were afraid. They were younger, right? You're growing your career. They're afraid to ask for it, and and we as leaders in some ways we were a little bit astonished by that because we thought to ourselves, of course people need a break after you do this, it's a very rigorous schedule. But it's that misalignment of perception, um, because people are sometimes skeptical of speaking up, that I really think as I look at my path and I look at it for other people going through what I went through, starting out my family, that's really important is that communication element.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most inspirational things I heard one of the other ladies on these conversations say was, speak up. Even if your voice shakes, it doesn't matter. Speak up. So couldn't agree with you more. Unless you ask, the answer is no. We have to learn to advocate for ourselves.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. It takes courage to do that, but I also find that once you get comfortable doing that, it comes easier and easier to people. And the
It
other
does.
thing, ironically, for young people is when others start to see that,
Hmm.
you become a young leader.
Yeah.
And so it fulfills two,
Yeah.
it fulfills two points with respect to that.
Yeah. Absolutely. It does. It does. Speaking of young leaders and our young colleagues, what would be your advice, Julie, to some of the younger women and men that are just starting out in their careers?
So when I do job interviews with people, I always tell them I could sell A&M to you and you would want to sign up as soon as I get done giving my elevator speech, right? I'm very enthusiastic about where I work and know that the rest of my career will be spent here, but it's not our job to sell people. So when I give advice, I say, getting back to this concept of what your own principles are, the own priorities you set for yourself, make sure that you understand those when you're looking for a place you want to work. Because presumably you're going someplace anticipating it's going to be for a long time. And if your core values disconnect with the core values of the company, you're going to struggle to succeed at that organization. And that is not something I learned until later when I went back and reflected on why I have success at A&M. I in some ways retrofit that perspective, but if I really think about it now and giving advice, it would be to be more conscientious of those values, which I do think for this new generation is really changing. There is definitely a shift in the mindset of, back when I was looking for a job, it was to get ahead. It was to have a better life than my parents did and my grandparents, in a way that tied to monetary contribution or monetary success as a big driver. And now it's wonderful that we do see a shift, that people are thinking about a lot more things than that, about how they can have a wholesome life, right? You get back to that question that you asked about balancing personal and professional, and people take more responsibility for themselves to ensure
Right.
that they can have a better balance. So I think that that fundamental core value discussion you have with yourself, even if you write it down, and you know, silly as that seems, is something that's important. And then this point of when you walk out of the door of university or college, the things that you think about are going to be much different than the things you think about when you're 30, 40, 50 years old. And ensuring that when you're looking for this lifelong career, that you do have a company or a firm that's able to grow with you, and the mindset is open to change, not open to lower quality work, but is open to change and to allow you to grow, which, by the way, has the benefit of being a benefit for your company or your firm. I think that the loyalty that you build as an organization with working with individuals to help them succeed is always going to be a two-way street.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for young people. And then that final push is along the journey of where you take your career to be able to advocate for yourself, because it really is true. You and I have things that we've experienced in our lives where we probably could go back and say, I wish I would have told somebody because they assumed something else. And that's not the way I was thinking at the time. And all we really had to do was have the courage to speak up, so that our wishes or our intents would be known. And I think that could make a big difference in people's careers.
Thank you, Julie. Very, very helpful. Really appreciate you taking the time today and sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you.